10 craziest UFC events of all time. Imagine you're set to experience one of the biggest events of your favorite sport and something crazy happens all of a sudden that's like a jolt out of the blue and ruins all the hype and excitement. While the likeliness of such a thing happening is quite slim, we do have examples in history showing us that such things actually have happened. And the UFC is no exception. Welcome everyone. In today's video, we will be looking at the 10 craziest UFC events of all time. But before moving ahead, take a moment to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Now without further ado, let's hop in. Number 10. UFC 279. This pay-per-view was originally planned to broadcast the main event as a bantamweight title bout featuring Aljamain Sterling and TJ Dillashaw. However, not for long was the anticipation and excitement allowed to prevail, because eventually this pay-per-view ended up not going ahead as planned, as the main event for this card was given to the non-title match fight of Nate and Khamzat. Things got rougher given that during the fight week, the card's press conference was cancelled midway due to backstage brawls between the teams of Kevin Holland, Khamzat Chimaev, and Nate Diaz. The ending did happen, however, miraculously, considering that a few other factors did all it took to ruin the chance of the event taking place. Number 9. UFC Week is 5. UFC was greatly impacted by COVID-19, considering that restrictions had resulted in the cancellation of literally 5 straight UFC events, which was already damaging enough. Therefore, COVID-19 had already caused damage to the UFC. But UFC Week is 5 was actually a big disastrous event, considering most of the bouts were cancelled, with some being reasoned as the fighters catching COVID, while one was cancelled due to a fighter missing the weight mark, and hence not getting promoted, and a lot more were cancelled too due to undisclosed reasons. The event surely was a disaster for the UFC, and COVID-19 was the sole reason. Hence, in the end, this event only featured 8 total fights in all. That's it, and the new main event was dedicated to the face-off between Derek Brunson and Edmund Shabazian. Number 8. UFC Fight for the Troops. In the time frame of 5 years from 2008 to 2013, the UFC held 3 events that were dedicated to the US military and helped raise funds for the Fallen Heroes Fund. However, the first of all these events was nothing less than a startling shock for Dana White and everyone. This was in fact one of the most absurdly violent shows, considering by the time the show ended, 6 fighters were hospitalized. Now, here goes the list of damage. Corey Hills broke his leg. Former Navy SEAL Brandon Wolf was hospitalized due to a massive forehead hematoma. And lastly, the losers of all the last 4 fights were greeted at the hospital. Now, that's some real violence. You can assume how deadly the event was and how violence came with it. A fighter broke his rib, another dude broke his arm, one guy was terribly KO'd and had to go to ER, and the main event of the pay-per-view resulted in a fighter being KO'd and being carried to the hospital. Number 7. UFC 250. This event was another one that adds to the list of those being impacted by COVID, considering that at the time of this event was scheduled, no restrictions were imposed, and it was scheduled in an arena in Sao Paulo. However, by the time the event came nearer, COVID was in full swing, and the arena for this event was converted into a facilitation center for COVID patients. A change of venue took this event to Vegas, at the Apex, and literally in front of no fans. That was hilarious yet disastrous damage to the UFC. The headliner, which had to feature Triple C defending his bantamweight championship, was cancelled due to the change of venue, and the bout between the Divas, which was cancelled due to a fighter requiring more time to train, was back on, considering that the event was delayed a month, and hence more time was given. Many Brazilians planned to participate in the event, however, the new location in the US resulted in that not happening. Roughly 10 other matches had to undergo changes or cancellations, which was a big blow to the event. Number 6. UFC on ESPN Plus 25. Roughly, the UFC history has 6,500 fights under its belt, with only 20 DQs, which suggests that only 3% of all UFC cards will have DQs. However, what happened at UFC on ESPN Plus 25 was startlingly unprecedented. On this night, 2 DQs were seen. This has never happened before in the entire UFC history, which makes this event qualify for our list of the craziest UFC events. Surprisingly, both of the DQs took place in the main card, and you won't believe it. But for the same foul too. The first DQ took place when one of the fighters KO'd the other with an illegal knee. The other DQ was due to another illegal knee. This was a first time the UFC went to a Mexican city, and I'm sure they won't do that again. Number 5. UFC 133. This event was scheduled to host 2 title matches as its main card, however, guess what? Yes, you guessed it right. The worst thing that could have happened did actually happen, and due to some injuries of one of the fighters of both matches, the title matchups were cancelled or postponed, and had to be replaced by another non-title match. Then again, a change of plans took place and the title matchup was decided to go as normal, but yet again, UFC suffered a jolt, and after a set of perplexing changes, Tito Ortiz saved the day by signing to join the card after initially showing unwillingness. The other fights were nothing normal either. 8 fighters had to be replaced or withdrawn from their matchups, which involved many of those facing injuries or some other issues, which prevented the event from going on in the smoothest way that the UFC initially expected. Number 4. UFC 159. At times, the UFC has to go through sleepless nights due to issues that arise before the scheduled event or just at the nick of time, which turns out to have disastrous impacts on the UFC. And UFC 159 was no exception, either. 3 of the 4 scheduled fights had to undergo changes, and things got even worse on the fight day. Nick Catone was hospitalized due to dehydration, which resulted in his match with James Head being cancelled. Another fighter was TKO'd due to a broken thumb. The other 2 bouts faced endings via technical decision due to eye pokes. Overall, this event probably would have given Dana White a bad headache due to many changes and cancellations, but still, the event took place. Number 3. UFC 177. This event was scheduled to be headlined with the title match for the Light Heavyweight Championship rematch, but it was later moved to the next pay-per-view, and again threw Dana White into worry. However, even if the match had stayed in the UFC 177, it still would have been cancelled due to the injuries of the participants. With so many changes and cancellations being part of this event, this show ended up featuring barely 8 fights, which even included those transferred from the previous pay-per-view. Number 2. UFC 223. The list of craziest events cannot be completed without this one. This one involved the confrontation between Conor and Nurmagomedov due to a statement issued by Nurmagomedov that Conor was a chicken. This resulted in some anger amongst the 2 fighters, and a viral video surged on the internet showing the 2 fighters coming face to face. Things got even worse when Conor threw a dolly at a bus full of fighters in an attempt to confront Nurmagomedov. This injured many other fighters too, which resulted in the changes and cancellations of many other bouts, which is why the event was a disastrous one. Some other matchups were scheduled featuring Conor, Khabib, and other fighters too nevertheless. UFC 223 wasn't the smoothest of the events to have been known in UFC history, and this was all due to a fighter calling another fighter a chicken. Number 1. UFC 149. Due to the meeting of United Nations being held in Brazil, the height match of Anderson Silva and Kyle Sonnen was taken to UFC 148 from UFC 147, but this raised other issues. The UFC 148 originally had to feature a title match which had to be cancelled due to this, but as well as one of the players being injured. Then there was another undercard which also had to undergo changes, as both the opponents got injured and replaced by new ones, and one of those 2 new fighters had also been injured, so things were simply getting messier. Moreover, UFC 149 experienced another shock as a debut was cancelled and some more bouts were cancelled too, which literally upset Dana White greatly. So these were the 10 craziest events in UFC history, which without a doubt would have given Dana White sleepless nights. Share your thoughts about these events in the comments below, and don't forget to ring the bell icon and subscribe to our channel to stay updated. See you next time.